And you are podcasting with Gary DeMar. Let's figure things out.
If you've been on Facebook for any time in the last week or so, there must be hundreds and hundreds of short reels of people claiming that we're living in the last days, and all the signs are around us. We can't get away from them. This is the end. I have never seen such last days madness in all my life. And of course, the internet has made this possible. And then people with their own cameras, and you can load videos up, and you can say anything you want in order to get people's attention that we're living in the last days, scaring people to death. Now, this is not for me to say that things in the world aren't a mess right now. But one of the reasons things seem to be a whole lot worse than they've ever been in the history of the world is because we get literally 24/7 news from all different kinds of markets and all different media outlets. You know, when I was growing up, you had essentially three TV stations: ABC, CBS, NBC. It was over an antenna on your television. You had radio, which was mostly AM radio, and most of it was playing, music. There were very, very few talk shows were going on. A couple of them out of New York City, but sports were really big where I grew up, and so this is what we were hearing. And in world-shattering events, of course, were by newspapers, and we had two newspapers. You get one in the morning, the Post-Gazette, and you get one in the evening, and that was the Pittsburgh Press. And that's where you got your news. And Walter Cronkite was big in terms of the news in the evening, and that's essentially what you had. Today, every earthquake in the world is recorded. They're recorded because we have earthquake recording equipment everywhere around the world. They can, if you set off a large explosion in your neighborhood, it's going to be recorded. And so I'm going to play you this one. This guy shows up quite a bit.
The earth seems to be unraveling right in front of our eyes. Earthquakes, tsunamis, even spaceships flying toward the earth. Watch this video right now. As you can see, the entire planet is shaking, and Jesus said that we are in the birthing pains of the last days. Right now, you are experiencing what the Bible calls birthing pains. Jesus is at the door. He is knocking. He is coming very, very soon. And you need to be ready. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments.
Well, I'm going to let you know what I think. I don't have time. I think I may have made some comment, but here's another guy going to Matthew chapter 24 and using Matthew chapter 24 as a prophetic indicator that we people today, that's who Jesus is speaking about. And he talks about birthing pains. It's really birth pains used in Matthew chapter 24. But if you look at the text, it's very clear what these birth pains were, and when they were. I mean, obviously, if you look at Matthew 24, the disciples come up to Jesus and ask the question, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of the end of the aeon, the age, or this old age in terms of from the time of Adam until the time of Jesus? You have to remember that when Jesus came, he came as a redemptive individual, cleaning up or doing what Adam and Eve should have been doing. That's a very simple way of saying this. Jesus is the fulfillment of the creational mandate found in Scripture, and he came and paid the penalty for what took place in the garden. No matter how you read the first few chapters of Genesis, we are brought into the new covenant with Jesus as the one who is fixing all of this. And he's fixing all of this in terms of his own self, giving up his own self. He's the Lamb of God who was slain before the foundation of the world. And he's on the cross, and he says, "It is finished." But before doing that, in 3 Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Matthew is the most extensive because it begins with chapter 21 and ends at the end of 25. And it's one long narrative. The audience is very clear as to who Jesus is speaking to. The religious leaders are there. And at one point in chapter 21, verse 42, Jesus said to them, and the them was the people of that time. Jesus said to them, "Did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I say to you." Now, there's a guy on Facebook, and he's very irritating because he just makes up stuff. And you also hear people, when you see the second person plural, they will say, "Oh, well, that's always used this way, and it can refer to anyone." Not in chapters 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. It's very evident that the you there is them. And even the religious leaders who opposed Jesus understood this. Verse 43, "Truly I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and be given to a nation producing the fruit of it. And he who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust." And when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was talking about them. And when they sought to seize him, they became afraid of the multitudes because they held him to be a prophet. So even the people who opposed Jesus understood that Jesus was talking to them. Jesus didn't say, no, I'm not talking to you. This is for a completely different future generation. And then when the church is going to be raptured and taken off the earth, and then after that, what's going to happen after that is the Antichrist is going to make a covenant with Israel. And this is based upon Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. I know it says 70 weeks of years, but there's a gap between the 69th and the 70th weeks, and that gap's going to be who knows how long. But since I'm a prophet, Jesus is telling them it's so far it's at least 2,000 years. No, they understood that Jesus was talking to them, and at their time, Jesus doesn't correct them at all. Then, of course, he goes in chapter 23, and he just lays it all out for them and said they were the generation that this was going to happen to. This, 23:31. "Consequently, you bear witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets." The you is them. "Fill up then the measure of the guilt of your fathers." The your is them. "You serpents, you brood of vipers, how shall you escape the sentence of hell?" The you is them. "Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. And upon you may fall the guilt of the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation." Even dispensationalists who take this generation of Matthew chapter 24, 34 as a future time, they understand that this was referring to that particular generation. If you can't get that from this, there is no way to discuss anything about Bible prophecy with somebody who says, well, the you here really isn't them. It's metaphor. It can be applied to any generation. I'm sorry, you do not take the Bible seriously. And then, of course, Jesus comes out of the temple, chapter 24, verse 1. And Jesus came out from the temple, was going away when his disciples came to point out the temple buildings to him. And the reason they were doing that is because Jesus said, verse 38 of chapter 23, you behold, your house is being left to you desolate. That is, their house was going to be torn down. This was based upon the Leviticus 14 chapter, where the priests go in there and they inspect a house, and there's leprosy in the house, and then the people had to clean it up, and if they didn't clean it up and they came back and it still had leprosy, the priest said it needed to be torn down. Well, this was the second time that Jesus had, in fact, inspected and cleansed the temple. So if you go back to chapter 21, verse 12, when Jesus entered the temple, this would have been for the second time, and cast out all those who were buying and selling in the temple. Keep that little phrase in mind the next time you read the book of Revelation, chapter 13. Those who were buying and selling in the temple. See, the priests had access to the temple, and in order for you to get in and use the temple, you had to pay money in order to do that. That's what Revelation 13 is all about. And you overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den." And so this individual who's ranting about how the world is shaking and all of these things are taking place, and he talks about earthquakes in various places. And of course, there were earthquakes in various places in Jesus's day. We read about them at the end of the gospel narratives. We read about one in the book of Acts. You look at the historical record at the time, there were, in fact, earthquakes in various places. It doesn't say there will be bigger earthquakes than ever before. There will be more earthquakes around the world. The whole world will be shaken. No, not at all. This was referring to that particular period of time. And in reality here, these earthquakes really aren't the type of signs that Jesus is referring to here, because they're fairly common. And it's possible that Jesus is pointing this out. There'll be earthquakes in various places. There'll be wars and rumors of wars, is because those types of things happen in every generation. We're still seeing that today. And this is why Jesus in verse 34 says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." And so Jesus is warning them, don't be led astray by these common occurrences of events in history here. That's not what is really going on here. What Jesus is telling them, and this was going to take place before their generation passed away, verse 34, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." And then Jesus mentions about immediately after the tribulation of those days, there was, in fact, a tribulation period leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And then Jesus starts quoting from the Old Testament. It says, "The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the land will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." This is taken right from Daniel chapter 7, verse 31, direct quotation from the Old Testament. "And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." This is a fulfillment of what we see in the book of Acts chapter 1, verse 11, where Jesus is taken up in a cloud. He's surrounded by angels, and he will come in the same way. That's what exactly took place here. Jesus came back on a cloud. There were angels that were doing the gathering here, and this was a local event. And just like this was a local event when Jesus was taken up. And how do we know it was a local event? Verse 16 of Matthew 24. "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to get the things out that are in his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse babes in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath." This was the local the way the people lived at that time, flat roofed homes and stuff. I've gone through this many times and seen my books, Wars and Rumors of Wars and Last Days Madness. Now, this person said that it talked about Jesus is at the door. Actually, it says that Jesus is at the doors. And the doors of what? he's at the doors of the temple, and he's going to destroy that temple. And because there were doors on the temple, there's a point in the book of Acts where the Apostle Paul was in the temple, and they throw him out through the doors of the temple. And so this is what's being described here, and this is what we find. We're up in chapter 24, where it says, do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. So the doors, unfortunately, it's translated in many translations as at the door. It's at the doors. This takes you back to what Jesus said in the 3rd verse. Sorry, that was verse 2, not verse 3. So the whole complex of this prophecy is related to that generation alone. If you don't see that, then you will be fooled by every profiteer who's telling you this is the generation. Every person who has claimed that their generation was the last generation, has been proven wrong. Now you might say, oh, but this time it's different. And the reason it's different is because Israel is back in the land. Now, that was the thesis of Hal Lindsey in his book, Late Great Planet Earth, where he said Israel becoming a nation again in 1948 was prophetically significant, even though there is not one word in the New Testament that says anything about Israel becoming a nation again. Nothing. Nada. The Old Testament talks about Israel returning to the land and becoming a nation again and rebuilding the temple. That took place after the captivity. But there's nothing in the New Testament that says anything about that. Now, you would think that something that major would have filled the New Testament in at least one place, but nothing. People say, well, it's the fig tree illustration in Matthew chapter 24, when the fig tree puts forth its leaves. The problem with that is it's a common feature of depicting the time of spring, which is that's what takes place. Luke says it's not just the fig tree; it's all the trees. It's like, say, when spring takes place. When you see all the leaves on the trees, spring is near. Now, if you take the fig tree as Israel becoming a nation again, you've got a problem with what you find in chapter 21, where Jesus curses the fig tree. It says, there will never be any fruit on this tree. So you got to be careful about how you're going to use these analogies, because if you end up using them in one place, fig tree represents Israel, and it's in chapter 21, Jesus says there'll never be any fruit on it, and you make the case this is a leaves-only tree in Matthew chapter 24, it has nothing to do with modern-day Israel today. And then, of course, you've got the audience relevance here in Matthew chapter 24, verse 33. Even so, you too. Who's the you here? The you is them. When you see, not us, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. And you notice this clip I showed you. He says, Jesus is near. This is near. Wait a minute. But Jesus said it was near 2,000 years ago. James, in his letter, chapter 5, says the coming of the Lord is near. It's the same word. And people say, well, timing for God is different from us. Yeah, granted, timing for God is different for us. But God's not talking about God time. He's talking about our time. You got everything in Matthew chapter 24 describing things that are familiar to those of that day. And they understood that, even quoting Old Testament passages. You want to know what Jesus said about the sun, moon, and stars language, go back and see how it was used in the Old Testament. See how it was applied. How do you determine about what Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven? Where is that? Well, that's in Daniel chapter 7. You need to go back and look at that. And so Jesus is using language they can understand. They know what doors were. And since he was talking about the temple, they know what the temple was. They know that the temple had doors on it. And so Jesus comes in judgment to that particular generation. So my point in all this is be wary, be curious, look these things up, just know that this has been told before. I know one of the latest thing is that you have Donald Trump going over there and trying to make peace in Israel. And this is the most annoying thing about these prophecy speculators. No matter if it's peace or war, they have an answer for it. Well, peace, that's going to be a false peace. And so the Antichrist is going to use the whole peace thing, and he's going to trick everybody. And then he's going to make a covenant with Israel, and he's going to break the covenant with Israel. And this is supposedly out of Daniel chapter 9, verses 24, 27. It says nothing about an Antichrist, or nothing about an Antichrist making a treaty with Israel and then breaking it. Again, this is all concocted from a particular system. So, the Matthew 24 here is very, very compact, and it deals with a beginning point where Jesus points out the temple, how it was going to be destroyed, and it has an end point with Matthew 24, verse 34. Of course, it goes on and deals with other aspects of what was going to take place before that generation passed away. And I cover that in my book, Last Days Madness, and also in my book, Prophecy Wars, and you can get those at AmericanVision.org. So don't get hoodwinked by these end-time speculators. They have been around for centuries. Get the book by Frank Gummerlock that American Vision publishes called The Day and the Hour. And it's almost a year-by-year study of how people have taken all these verses and other verses and have applied them to their day. This is an embarrassment to the church today, that people are out there saying all these things. And unfortunately, there are a lot of, when you get to be my age, I'm 75, so I grew up during the Hal Lindsey era of 1970 when his Late Great Planet Earth came out. And, when you think about how long ago that was 55 years ago. And supposedly everything was supposed to end before 1988. And here we are in 2025. So most of you have heard all of this, but I know you're probably being inundated with prophetic speculation on Facebook, and maybe people are saying things to you about this, and maybe this will trigger some enthusiasm for you in order to do a little more study on it and help people through. You don't need to argue with them, and just point things out to them and see what they have to say. And if you like, you say, look, there's a couple of books. There's a small book called Wars and Rumors of Wars. There's even a shorter one called Is Jesus Coming Soon, that you can order and give to them to maybe allay some of their fears, and then also maybe help them to be better students of the Bible. So I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions about eschatology, please feel free to write to support@AmericanVision.org.
Thanks for podcasting with Gary DeMar. Please subscribe and share this with anyone you think really needs to hear it.